Hi everybody, I'm Jasmine Navarro, Certified Wellbeing Expert, and I work with educational institutions and companies helping them support their wellbeing. And as you know, every week I interview different experts who make a difference in people's lives. And today I'm super excited to be interviewing a friend and an expert, Jonscott. Hi, Jonscott.
Hey, Jasmine, nice to be here with you today.
So good to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm from New York City, where I am located presently for a few more days before I hit the road again. I'm an organizational psychologist. I have been helping people and organizations for more than 25 years. And my goal is to kind of try to find the balance between working smart, working hard, and really working purposefully. So my organizations that I've worked with represent a number of different verticals, from banking to fashion to consumer products, manufacturing, defense, aerospace, everywhere in between. And I've worked across 5 continents at the moment, or 6 actually now. So it's been really exciting. I've worked with over 100,000 people in over 50 countries now. So it's really been an exciting journey, and it continues. I think we're all evolving and changing and growing, or I hope we are. I hope we're all evolving and growing and changing.
Sounds extremely interesting, Jonscott. So you chose this topic, being in alignment to boost your well-being to succeed in business. Can you explain a bit about what that means and why you chose that topic for today?
For sure, Jasmine. So for those of you, like Jasmine and I were discussing, those of you seeing this, what's the topic? And I thought a lot about the past few years specifically. And many of my clients, both individual C-suite executives I coach and larger organizational initiatives, are impacted and have been impacted by the pandemic. And in my opinion, most of them were not new issues that were created. They were just issues that were exacerbated by the pandemic and all the different ways we had to adapt our behavior, from travel to in-person communication, to all the different ways it changed our day-to-day lives. Some positive takeaways and certainly some negative takeaways. So I keep looking at how people have come back, for lack of a more eloquent way of putting it. So I feel like there's a huge disconnect between what people were doing before and what people are doing now. And I mean that in all ways. So for example, I have clients who said, we just want our old culture back. And I said, well, that's impossible. Your culture is being defined by right now, like this exact moment for you and your teams and yourself. How you behave, the decisions you take, and how you interact with each other and your clients and the public. These are all new ways that you've adapted. So this all informs organizational culture and society as a whole. So how we are going about this, I think, is defining these moments now. And I feel like alignment is this mystery for many people, where it's just really being in sync with who you are and what you do. And it doesn't mean utopia. There's certainly, there's plenty to improve for all of us. I just think it means, from what I've seen with my clients in the past and presently, it means working with yourself and your day-to-day, not against yourself. So being true to who you are and how you show up each day.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. Yeah, because when I see alignment, I think of mind, body, and spirit being all aligned. But I actually didn't even think about work. But of course, it's connected with, I guess, every area of our life.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. Some clients of mine were doing surveys after COVID, was less of an impact. And I urged some of them not to do those surveys, to ask people how they preferred to work, because I knew culturally and from a perspective of alignment, they were not interested in necessarily having the employees decide how and where they work. So I said, if you're going to ask the question, then you need to be able to be prepared to take the feedback and make decisions with that new feedback. So several of my clients, unfortunately, asked their teams their opinion about remote work, their opinion about making sure their KPIs and their performance is high, but not necessarily being in the office as much as the leaders of the organization wanted them back. So what I was afraid of came to pass, unfortunately, which is they basically asked everyone, how do you prefer to work? They got all this data. And despite, in many cases, all the data, they're like, okay, we need you back anyway. So you ask people their opinion. They're being honest with you. And then they're like, yeah, anyway, we need you all to come back to the office. So so that's one simple way. And then before we were live, we discussed something basic, like the DISC assessment, which You know,
Yes, tell us about that.
essentially it falls into like 4 quadrants about how you show up in life. Whether, my old company used to look at things, the company I work with, as like life is a machine, life is a family, life is a party. It looks at how you approach your world. And then there's an adapted score of the same assessment, which is how you approach your work.
Okay.
And the distance between those 2 points, to distill it down to just common language, is how difficult is it for you to show up at work each day? How far from who you are authentically do you need to be to do your job? And that's a fascinating fact to look at. If you look at, and everyone's seeing this and ourselves, right? We know when we're in alignment. We know when we're doing things at work that I can remember. I mean, I'm very fortunate in the sense that I remember just leaving clients recently and thinking to myself, like, how great it was to do that work with them and how meaningful I feel as if our partnership is producing positive results for them and their teams and their organizations. I feel a great sense of fulfillment with my work.
Right. Yeah.
To me, it's a generative reality, right? So the more I work with someone, the more excited I get, the more strategic we get, the more results we get. It's kind of this building collective. If I was disengaged or if they were not engaged, and trying to pretend to be something, someone, some type of person that they're authentically and they're out of alignment with, that's a dangerous organizational reality. And it's personally a depressing reality to imagine. I was mentioning recently that I have friends who took a 20-year track. They're going to work a job for 20 years, whatever kind of work it is. And when I would ask them when they began their work, how's work going? And they would say to me, 19 more years. And they'd look at their watch. I mean, that's a terrible way to approach.
It is. And people, and I used to be one of them, would do it for the weekend as well. I wasn't happy in my job and I would just be thinking of the weekend, like 2 days to go, 3 days to go, countdown. As soon as it's Monday, 4.5 days. That's kind of the same thing, isn't it? You're just living for the weekend, but then the weekend's over, or living for the holiday.
It is. And it's really fascinating that you mentioned that, Jasmine, because I can remember, unfortunately, and perhaps you're watching this, Ken, I can remember Sundays being the worst day, because you're dreading Monday. And inevitably with that mindset, right, your weekends are a snap. They're gone in a split second and your weeks just drag. Yeah. So I can remember, sadly, being in that mindset. And then also I can remember being so misaligned with what I was doing that Fridays were even bad, because even like I just knew that Friday was going to end and Monday morning was going to be here in a blink. So Fridays became depressing. I mean, obviously I took action to change that reality, but I do think there are many people who just kind of resign themselves to the fact that this is how it is. The economy is bad. This is this. And we can always go in this loop of making our decisions seem less impactful and negative than they are. But I think we need to be, aligned with who we are and what's important to us and like how we're showing up each day.
No, I love that. But going back to being aligned, like for people who maybe don't really understand, like for me, being aligned is when like everything sort of feels right, effortless, and in flow. Is that how you're? Is that what it means for you and what you're talking about when you feel?
I think on a macro sense, for sure, that's like the big picture. I think, since we're on, many different formats here, but I'll speak specifically to the people who are looking at this and considering what's coming top of mind first for them. Some of you watching may be thinking, this really translates into my work, right? So how do I show up? How can I be in alignment? I'm an accountant, I'm a marketing professional, I'm a finance person, I work whatever. If this is what you enjoy doing, or if you derive some pleasure from this and that you feel some purpose and you feel as if you're rewarded, not just monetarily, but you feel it's a rewarding pursuit, then to me, in that context, right? In a larger scale, yes, what you said, like mentally, spiritually, physically, like everything. I think that's a bit of a lofty goal. And to put it like in the most simplistic terms, I think for some people who don't choose to go in, it's not a matter of understanding for sure, don't choose to go that deeply, just to keep it topical in a way, like, if you show up at work and you're miserable every day, please don't do that. I can't think of a more simple way to say this. I've seen statistics that are in the hundreds of billions of euro, pounds, dollars, whatever, in terms of the opportunity cost of a disengaged workforce, right? So globally, it's an epidemic. I mean, think about yourself as you watch this. Think about the people on your teams, people you've known, and the people you were certain just couldn't care any less about what they were doing. They were literally there punching a clock, checking their watch, and ready to get out of there. I was someplace recently, and it was a quiet, it was a restaurant. It was very quiet. And I said, oh, wow, this has it been busy? They said, no, it's always like this. It's great, this wait staff. And I said, you do realize if customers don't come here, the business will close. And so I think that people tend to not be connected to the fact that if they're not engaged in what they're doing, particularly if they're client facing or public facing, like in that case, it took me back because I thought to myself, wow, they have no connection between the fact that there's no customers. They couldn't care any less because they get paid the same. And
That's true.
the customer there. So it's maybe not the communication you want to share with public facing people.
You're
So
right. And maybe they don't realize that their presence actually has an effect on people around them. Some people don't even realize. Maybe they feel completely unacknowledged and ignored, maybe. So they just feel like no one will notice anyway. But it's so we notice, we feel everything, don't we?
It's really interesting and very true. So, to stay true to the topic of this, how to be in alignment to boost your well-being and success in business. I think part of it is to really ask yourself the tough questions, and this. This is not, I don't care how great an actor you are. When you show up at work, if you are happy or unhappy. And listen, again, I'm not speaking utopia. I'm not thinking that there's going to be rainbows and daisies and, so but I do think that there's a place of awareness, and perhaps some of it comes from, experience, perhaps some of it, because it does come, some of it from experience. I can remember when I was much younger, people asked me, what I wanted or what title I wanted. I said, I don't care about anything as long as you pay me enough money. Particularly here in the States, like that was really the only metric that, most of us really were drilled into our heads as kids. It's like, just make sure you get a job that pays well. And, and I've heard what I think is perhaps the most horrendous response when people talk about work and how they may not be happy or they don't feel like they're connected to it. And I've heard so many people say, well, that's why they call it work. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. So I don't think that you should have to choose between working in a way that makes you feel connected and purposeful and dare I say happy with the concept that you're getting paid to do this. So you should be miserable because they're paying you to be there. I remember years ago having a conversation with a mentor of mine, and they said something which I thought was pretty interesting, which is, the bigger brands, and I've been very lucky, but particularly as I began my career to work with brands, I'd never had to explain where I worked, right? So when I started my career at L'Oreal, I didn't have to explain what L'Oreal was. People knew what L'Oreal was. And I always took that as like a positive for me in my career. That was a brand people knew. And the reality is, a friend of mine said, well, you do realize that the more cachet, the more awareness a brand has, the more the brand is desirable to work or to affiliate with. If it's in your, some of my students and I will recognize this, like we talk about our evoked set or inept set in terms of marketing, like what are the brands that, we want to be like, associated with, connected to, and then the inept set, what are the brands we want to stay away from? So if it's in your evoked set, these brands, and you work there, it could seem very exciting to you. And then you realize that in order for them to attract workers, they don't really have to work as hard, right? I mean, I can remember vividly working for a fashion brand here in New York, and hearing the people responsible saying, listen, if they don't like it, there's 1,000 people who will take the job for less money. And they weren't kidding. They're like, they was a culture or a fan capacity to the people who wanted to work. They just wanted to be associated with the brand. So I always took that to heart afterwards, thinking to myself, wow, okay, like there is some correlation between this. So are you in alignment, or are you just a fan of the brand? Or do you have this image of the brand that you think is going to be, I can tell you for certain that, the largest and most famous fashion brands in the world are also companies that require not the most glamorous work on a day-by-day basis. And anybody watching this at one of those brands will kind of be shaking their head like, oh yeah, it's a business like anything else. You deal with the same markets, you deal with this, similar marketing strategies that are tailored to your business. You deal with the same finance, you deal with the same manufacturing, you deal with the same issues, perhaps in different directions, but the same core functions that exist in every business, whether you're manufacturing salt or high-end haute couture fashion. So it's very
You're right.
interesting about some of the different capacities. Like, I work in finance. Okay, what brand? Does basically the work you're doing is, if it's retail, if it's commercial, if it's there. I think my point is, if you derive some sense of connection, if you are, I remember interviewing someone once and he said, procurement is my life. He was a procurement leader at a major company. And I was like,
Yeah,
God bless him. He's plugged in, it works for him. And
exactly.
I think we have to be careful, right? We have to, because there's observing and perceiving, right? So observing is just
Right.
static, what you see. The perceiving that we tend to do is putting it through all of our filters, right? So if I see Jasmine, having a coffee at 11 a.m., I think, oh, Jasmine's having a coffee. Now, if I'm perceiving that, I'm like, oh, maybe Jasmine isn't working. Maybe Jasmine has a lot of free time. Maybe Jasmine should be working. Maybe so I don't know that you've been up since midnight. I mean, I say this specifically because you know my work schedule and my time zones. So I always say people think I either always work or never work, depending on the time of day me, where I am. So, for example, like I'm pretty much wrapped up in New York right now because it's 6, 7 o'clock in Dubai. It's afternoon in Europe. Asia's already gone to bed and they're asleep most likely. So for me, like I'm basically done. But if you talk to me at 2:30 in the morning, some days when I'm up and at it because the time zone variance, people don't see that. They may see me at a yoga class at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday and wonder how's he free on Wednesday? He must not work. So I think we have to be careful, right? Alignment is not going to look the same for everybody. And alignment is not going to be something that your parents, spouse, partner, coworkers are really going to necessarily be able to tell. But I mean, this is, I think you have to start inside, right? I think this is going back to all the work that you do, Jasmine, which is like, when you work with clients, is it in their best interest? And that's not a simple answer, right? It's not a simple deliberation for many of us. But when and everyone watching this will know that when you're in alignment, when you know that I remember flying back from France years ago. I mean, probably 10 years ago. It was one of my best work experiences I've ever had at that point in time. And I was replaying it. It was a fantastic week. And I was replaying it in my head, literally in the air, looking out over the wing of the plane.
Oh, really? That must have been good.
And it occurred to me much later, hours later in the duration of this flight back from Europe to the States, I was like, wait a second, I get paid to do this. And that to me was the light bulb that went off in my head that I was on the very right track for me. Because it wasn't looking to exchange time for money. It wasn't like, oh, this is terrible, but I get paid. It was, I was so engaged with the people I was working with and the teams I was working with. And I feel as if I made such a positive impact on their experience. And then much later on, I was like, wait a second, I get paid to do this, which is to me the best case scenario, right? I mean, do I have that perspective every day, all day? Certainly not. But I think I'm pursuing alignment in terms of what I do, who I am, and how I work, for sure. And that's what I suggest to your audience.
That sounds absolutely amazing. And so I guess the next question I'm going to ask, because people might be wondering, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are unhappy at work. Like, because you said you weren't always aligned. So how did you get to be aligned? And what can be the first step for others to start that journey of being aligned and being happy? Like, what do you need to do first?
It's funny, Jasmine, it's such a bigger question than it may initially seem. So I would be lying if I didn't tell you that circumstances in my life forced me to reevaluate. So I made some errors of commission and omission. I made some missteps in trusting people I shouldn't have. And I made some judgment decisions in my younger days that I wouldn't do again. That being said,
but you learned, yeah.
That being said, precisely. That being said, I think that you can, let's look at this way. And I love this phrase I heard several years ago. If you can consider the phrase, the best, worst thing that's happened to you. What I mean by that, and it was explained to me brilliantly years ago, is what happened to you, and all of us have something or more than one thing that's happened to us in the past, whether again it was our fault or our decisions that caused it or some combination, wherever it was, that at the time seemed so devastating we couldn't see a way past it. We couldn't see a way out of it. We couldn't see a way to recover. It was debilitating and devastating.
Yes.
And today, the lessons we've all learned since then, with the behaviors we've changed, with the relationships and way that we go about our life now, if we had the choice, if someone handed us, grabbing my prop of my iPad, if someone gave us a wand and said, you can wave the wand and go back to that point, we would not go back and do it differently, because the value we took away, the lessons we learned, the best, worst things sometimes inform who we are in a way that we would never have arrived at if those failures or mistakes didn't happen. So I think alignment is a constant process, right? What makes me feel aligned today in my early 50s is different than what made me feel aligned when I was a new dad in my late 20s, right? So there's very different realities that take place. Similarly, my good friends, several of which are around my age who have newborns or 2-year-olds, what's going to give them alignment in their career? Maybe they're looking for more balance with their kids. Maybe they're looking to spend more time, less time traveling. For me, when my kids went off to university, especially, I was pretty free to travel. My kids were very busy. They were at uni, 1,000+ miles from home. So I wasn't that concerned about it. I just had to check time zones to speak with them a little differently. So I do think it's important to pay attention to that aspect of your life, the best, worst things you would not change if you can go back to, but at the time felt absolutely devastating. So I think these are an opportunity for learning. It's an opportunity to realign. And I do think that we have to do this as an ongoing process. Alignment isn't something, we arrive at, take a test, pass the test, and we check that box for all eternity. Alignment is listening to yourself. And so to your question, sorry, I really kind of didn't answer the question. So I think people may be saying, well, I work in this job and I have bills and I can't, I don't feel aligned, but what am I going to do? I think it doesn't have to be, quit your job and, weave baskets in Bali, imagining, and I'm thinking about the people I know there that I've met there who weave baskets, who seem quite content with their lives. What may work for them, it may not work for you. And I think that looking at your life and say, okay, maybe it's a matter of stopping the downward spirals, right? So if you don't feel aligned at work, maybe waking up early and developing a habit of exercise early will help you feel a little bit more balanced, right? Maybe making sure it's something really basic. Again, do I think this is going to be a life-changing reality? Maybe not, but maybe making sure that you retain a good sense of hydration for your body and that you get enough sleep. Things people ignore summarily. And I'm part of that culture, that Generation X culture, where I remember people were paying attention to their, work-life balance. And I remember at the time in my early 20s thinking to myself, you go pay attention to that, because that's just going to give me a competitive advantage in business. You worry about your balance with your life. And I'm going to work 10 times harder. And I realized it's a ridiculous mindset of a 23-year-old that I had at the time. So I think that there's a way to look at this. How can you make decisions that affect your health and well-being? And that's all encompassing, what you're consuming mentally, what you're allowing yourself to consume mentally, what environments you put yourself in by choice, what environments you have the courage. This is a big part of my work with clients, is courage and action, right? Having the courage to assess and see where you are and to question and challenge your decisions and to deal with the discomfort of change, and then taking action. Otherwise, all the things you think of, all the things you imagine, all the changes you want to make, all the things that are not satisfying you as a person in life and business, if you don't take action, it just all exists in your brain. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't mean anything. Exactly. So I think, take a step back, zoom out, and look at the decisions in your life as a macro. Think about the things that you do that are healthy and promoting more well-being for you in your life, because they will inextricably be tied to your success overall. And also, what do you measure success by? What are the aspects of life that you use to measure success? If it's financial, if it's just what you earn, I challenge you directly to re-examine why that is. What are you avoiding about your day-to-day that you're putting that as your sole metric, right? So, and I think that you have to re-examine, because again, what works for you when you're younger is not going to work with you as your life continues. And what works And that's a good thing, right? I mean, again, if we were living the same lives with the same decisions in the same way that we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, for those of you that are younger, even 5 years ago, it's a constant evolutionary process. So my hope, and we're going to run out of time soon. My hope and wish for you is to really take a second and think about it, and to make decisions based on your well-being overall. And they may not be popular,
yeah. And I love what you said about, because basically what it sounds like you're saying is taking the time out and actually spending some time, quality time with yourself. Like, things are not just going to magically change and get better. It's about you making that effort and taking the time. There's no quick fixes, are there? It's about stopping and putting in the effort and taking the action. And it is uncomfortable, like you said, and it's not easy. But
there's a great brand. It's a clothing brand called Seek Discomfort, and I quite love it. It's my whole, my quote from my life that I love the most is "The Man in the Arena" by Teddy Roosevelt. It's a fantastic quote. You can Google it. "The Man in the Arena." It's from a speech Teddy Roosevelt gave at the Sorbonne in 1913, I think it was, or I forget the year. It wasn't there, so I don't know. But it basically, it ends by saying, it's not the critic who counts. It's talking about that, and it ends so that it says, "So that your place shall never be with those cold and timid souls that knew neither victory nor defeat." So you have to embrace this discomfort. You have to get up when you get knocked down. You have to try to remove yourself from the minutia and think about what is the macro that you're dealing with, and how does your behavior, thoughts, and actions play into your well-being, and how is that going to contribute to your success overall? So some of the most successful people I know are not people who make the most money. They're the people who have designed and adapted their lives to be what they want it to be, and who find contentment and well-being in that decision, and are able to weather. This is the key, right? And I'll stop. They're able to weather the ups and downs in a way much more fluidly. If you think of a skier going over bumps, it's very adapted, right? The springs in your knees and how you're adapting to the bumps and are much more simple to do when you're aligned and why you're doing things. You said just now, take a step back and think of things. And I think we oftentimes live, and I see this happening with lots of people and clients, of course, we live in a way that is unintentional. Right? So if we're unintentional, right, how can we expect, if any success or happiness that we arrive at when we're unintentional is completely random and a happy accident. If we design a plan or set a direction, and we get thrown off and we course correct, at least we know the destination. I think, kind of that's the summary, right? Know or consider the destination you want, and then have the courage and to take action along that path and deal with the ups and downs that you deal with.
You're right. And enjoy the process if you can. You
have to. Yeah. Otherwise the alternative is not great, right? If you're not enjoying the process, if you're going to be negative about it.
You never know when the process will end. Beth, no, thank you so much, Jonscott, for sharing all of that. Is there anything else you want to say before we finish? And also, please let us know how we can find you.
I put my email there. You can feel free. I'll get back to you, or someone from the team will get back to you. If you have any questions or want to discuss, check out humanix.com. And again, the human aspect of that is modified with the IN for the man in the arena. That's where that name comes from. And I always believe in multiplying, and positive and amplifying things, which is where the X comes in terms of a multiplier. So that's my email. I think I would just challenge you to realize that moments of discomfort are not always in need of fixing right away. I think take time to think about why you're uncomfortable. What are the aspects that can bring you, that elevate you? So as you look to address the discomfort you feel by making courageous decisions, think about this. Every time you take a courageous decision and you embrace and really lean into feeling uncomfortable, you are leveling up almost every aspect of yourself, right? So if you're never uncomfortable, you will never level up, right? Maybe that's fine for you. Maybe you've hit that point of alignment, right? Where you hit a point where you're good, things are fine, you feel aligned, you feel happy, like things are moving in a way you're positively.
How often do you think, I'm just wondering your opinion about this, before we go. How often do you think we should feel uncomfortable? Because of course we don't want to feel uncomfortable 24/7. Like, how often do you think we need to be uncomfortable? Or is it just depends on everybody? I know that's a random question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I look at it this way. If I don't feel, I'll put it this way. My answer for me, and I can only answer for me in this specific way, is if I feel comfortable too long, I get concerned.
Oh,
right? So it's not so much how often should you lean into discomfort. My point is, if I get comfortable for too long, like, why is that? Like, what am I not seeing? And I try to exercise discipline. I'm not perfect at it by far, but I think to say, okay, well, what is it now? And for example, in summer, maybe a little different. Like I still work all summer. I don't necessarily travel as much in the summertime because my clients are mostly on holiday. Luckily, because they live and work in places that afford them, a proper summer holiday. I do think maybe my summer is a little different. My mindset and how I feel aligned in summer is different. I've kind of adopted some of my clients' ways of being. So I will take a little bit more of a holiday. I'll take my, team a little bit more of a holiday. And I think that in order for me to be engaged, I know for me that that's part of it. So I think that having people, look at this in a way that if you never feel uncomfortable, like some of you watching this may be like, well, isn't that the whole point of life is to avoid discomfort? And I'd like you to challenge that and think about, not that you want to put a rock in your shoe and walk around all day, but I mean, just in terms of your situation and decisions you make, are you pushing yourself? Are you addressing things that can be addressed, that make you unhappy or uncomfortable, that if you put the time, effort, and attention to it, you can move through and past. So that's my challenge for all of us.
Brilliant. I love that. And that's what we say in coaching. The magic happens outside your comfort zone.
Oh, yeah,
and when I heard that, I was like, oh, it's good to be comfortable. I didn't even realize. But thank you so much, Jonscott. That was amazing. I've learned so much from you. And thank you, everybody who was watching. If you have any questions or comments, please message Jonscott or me directly, or leave a question on the post. And Jonscott, if you'd like to leave your email and your website on the post as well. I don't know if you've already done that.
Yeah, it's you can see it by my name. So it's just Jonscott, Jonscott.
Oh, yeah. That's what you were talking about. Sorry. I wondered when you said it's there, and I was thinking, where? Okay. Thank you so much, Jonscott. And I'll see everybody next week.